Okay.
Okay. So we'll do the formal start. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to start, as always, by acknowledging the Noongar people, elders past, present, and continuing as the original custodians of this land, and to invite the spirits of this land that hold us and sustain us in so many ways to be here with us in our talk today. Okay. So, where do we even begin with this huge topic? So I'm just going to go through it at a reasonable pace, some parts that is, because a lot of people have been here for the previous lectures, or I've talked about these things before with you. So if I'm going into stuff you don't understand, please raise your hand and I will go through it more in depth. So pathologies of the spirit. I was fortunate to have Emily and Simon post me an email, my old lecture on this I did 10 years ago, because somehow I lost it, and they had a copy. And I'd already started reproducing this one, and I was very pleased to look at my new version and the old version. I find they're married, but the new version had some more information and new insights. So that was really good. So hopefully these will be useful for people. So one of the things that's happened in the last 40 years in the West, 40, 50 years really, since the mid-70s, maybe a little bit earlier, is the importation of various spiritual systems, beliefs, ideas, some from the East and some from indigenous cultures. And one of the key features of these things, these ideas and concepts, is that they've been imported in a very piecemeal way. They haven't been imported in its entirety. And one of the things that have been lacking is the understanding that is found in traditional esoteric, traditional indigenous cultures, that as well as there being positive, lovely, nice, light aspects to the spiritual dimensions, there are also what we might loosely call negative aspects, including negative beings, negative places on the earth, negative practices you can do. And what we've done in the West in the New Age, and now affecting the esoteric and even some Christian churches, is that we've taken the nice bits, we've taken the good bits, and we've completely ignored certain areas of it, because no one really wants to think about a fact that you can have good land spirit connection, go out into the desert and have a nice land spirit connection, and you can go out in the desert into the wrong spot and be in trouble and be terrified. And there's a good example of this in the novel Kangaroo by D.H. Lawrence, when he was visiting Australia. If anyone's read that, it shows him going into the bush, and he was terrified, absolutely terrified. There was something there that he should not have been engaging with. And that's part and parcel of the traditions that the West is filtered from. Okay, so we want to, I think it's beholden on people working with loosely called spiritual dimensions, whether that be Orthodox, small O Christian churches, to all the way to esoteric, magical, neo-pagan work, that we look at the actual reality of things, because otherwise people can get in trouble and get hurt. So that's the idea of presenting this, once again, 10 years from the first time I presented it. Because these ideas, these themes are still very relevant to me. Okay. I'm just going to quickly go through something I keep talking about. Okay. Which is, whenever we approach the inner realms, there are two broad ways of looking at this. One typified by Aleister Crowley, which basically says that whatever we engage with on the inner realms, we should not be attributing philosophical validity. That thing really exists, as much as my breakfast I ate this morning really exists. That real. And we should have a loose understanding about what we're engaging with. Typically, however, as creature meaning-making creatures, we go the other way and we project ourselves onto the inner realms. And there's an example there of C.W. Leadbeater, the theosophist, one of the big theosophists, who basically peopled his understanding of the other realms with his understanding of Victorian England. And he saw the masters and the people serving the masters in the inner realms exactly as Victorian English society was. And we have to make sense of what is intrinsically something that is really hard to make sense of, so we can do that by projecting onto it. So we have to be careful with that, even when we look at healing pathologies of the spirit, even when we look at when it comes to healing, we still have to be careful about our own projections. Okay. In a nutshell, the map is not the territory. And for those who still haven't really thought about and tried this experiment, we see this in school, or most of us have seen this in school, where I think this may be Peter now, where everything that's outside us is reflected, in this case in vision, by the eye into an image in our brain. And all we know is the image in our brain. We don't actually know really what's outside us, okay? Which is why someone looks completely different if you take 500 micrograms of LSD, because we've changed the brain, okay? We don't actually know what's really going on outside us. And if you really sit down and think about that enough, you will have a mystical experience, I'm sure. It's an intensely profound thing when you really realize that everything is actually being formed by our own processes inside us. Okay. There's probably enough new people here to tell my little cat story, where I've talked about the cat, and this is repeated experiments, so several cats, unfortunately, not killed, but experimented on, where they shaved away the fur, cut into the cat's area behind its ear, and put an electrode on the nerve going from the eardrum to the brain, and therefore when they rang a bell, they could hear it, they could register on a monitor. Bell, spiking monitor, bell, spiking monitor. They then put the cat in front of a cage of mice. The cat tried to get the mice, rang the bell, no spike. So the cat wasn't hearing it and forgetting about it in the brain, wasn't just not paying attention to it, it did not get to the brain because it was so focused. It was blocked in the nerves. So this is what we do all the time. We block things in our nerves, and talking about healing, we talk about, loosely in New Age terms, they're talking about body memories, where something's happened and it's stored in the body, in the nerves, in the somatic qualities here, hasn't got to the brain. And then later you can have another traumatic event and these memories can recur. Okay, it's not actually in the brain, so if you do hypnotherapy, you're not going to get it. It's stored in the body. The work of Wilhelm Reich looks at that stuff a lot. So this is something to bear in mind as well. The map is not the territory. We are constantly filtering. Okay. We're looking at subtle bodies today. I've gone through this in previous lectures, and other people here, I think, are au fait with the different forms of subtle bodies which are mapped out. Again, map is not the territory, but these are a rough comparison about the different forms, the different traditions, and how they see the subtle bodies. These are the bodies, these are the selves beyond the physical. Now we're using the term body, and again I keep stressing, it's just a way of understanding. You may use the word sheath, but that is still physical. These things are not physical. They're not physical, but we have to use physical terms because we're physical people. Okay, this is our map of the inner self we're using today. Quickly go through this because we've done hopefully enough before. We have the physical body, which we're all aware of now. You're sitting here, you're feeling warm, you're feeling cold. My feet are a little cold because I don't wear shoes. So I'm feeling that in my physical body. We have the etheric body, which is our energy body. All of these bodies, these selves, can be divided into different sub-levels. Particularly for today's lecture, which I haven't highlighted before, we are looking at the etheric double, which is seen to be a duplication of all of our physical components. So let's say the liver. You have an etheric liver that sits inside the liver and is slightly larger than the liver, small amounts. And the etheric double is very important for healing, for physical healing, okay, which is why it's mentioned. As I said, these bodies have different layers. The etheric double is the most dense layer of the etheric, the energy body. Very, very important for healing. With the astral emotional, where most of us live our lives, who are we? That's in the astral. We have a sense of, we're here now. If the lecture is boring you, you may be daydreaming, and part of you's over there. Okay. Beyond that, we have our mental patterns, our ideas, our concepts that form the way we feel. So something behind the feelings we have is an idea, a concept perhaps that we're wonderful, and therefore we have a good sense of self and we feel happy. Perhaps that we are not very good, that we're no good piece of shit, and therefore it doesn't matter what happens in the emotional level, we're going to feel bad. That's the mental level. And beyond that is the spiritual, only able to be talked about in metaphors, in imagery. Goddess, God combining, the one being, light, unity. Just words, way beyond any concept. Okay, so that's what we're going through. That's a basic to allow us to have communication, hopefully at a reasonable, we're doing reasonably well when I go on to the next bits. Okay, something we have to bear in mind, is that we operate on all the levels all the time. So we are here now physically, but we are also here etherically, we're also here astrally, we're also here mentally. And depending on your spiritual viewpoint and your spiritual tradition, we might be here spiritually or we may not be, because we've not developed that part of ourselves. But we are always interacting at all levels all the time. So there's an energy, an ether, that I am putting off now, and you are putting off ethers. Okay? The same with all the other levels all the time. I'll be coming back to that because it's quite important. Okay, so going back to the levels, pathologies can occur in all cells apart from the spiritual. The spiritual is where we're united with the source, the mystery, God, however we see that. And therefore the spiritual level is beyond stain and division. It was never born, it was never created, and therefore it cannot be damaged by created activity. That's the esoteric understanding of the spiritual self. However, most pathologies mostly occur in the etheric and the astral. They do occasionally occur in the mental level. They do occasionally, but most are in the astral or the etheric. Okay, so we're going to look at some causes. I'm just going to make sure I'm not missing out on anything. Okay, so we exist really, if you want to think about frog spawn. Okay, so we have an egg, which is ourselves, and we have ether, astral, mental effulgence that comes from us. And we exist in a sea of other frog spawn, where we can interact at the mental, astral, and etheric, and then on the physical level. So we exist in a sea created of these things. And so we exist now in a physical realm that matches our physical body. So there are physical particles of, mostly nitrogen, isn't it? Mostly nitrogen right here. There's something physical here, even though I can't see it. And there's a physical stool there. The same with the ether. We exist as an etheric self, an etheric body, within a pool of ether. The same with the astral. We exist in our astral self within a vast field of astral light, it's called. So we're like little frog spawn in a pond. There's lots of other little frog spawns around, and we have the water going in and out of us at each level. So the water goes in and out of a frog spawn, and the ether that is between me and Emily comes in and out of us. Okay? The same on the astral level, the same on the mental level, where we can share emotions, we can share mental concepts. Okay, so that's happening all the time. So we think of ourselves frog spawn in a pool of water, in a pond, hopefully a clear pond. Okay, so with that in mind, we think about the boundaries of the little frog spawn in the pool are very, very important. Okay, very, very important. If my boundary is too rigid, then not enough water will flow through, not enough ether, not enough astral, not enough mental nurturance, and I will become rigid and dry up on the sources of life. Conversely, if I have a very diffuse boundary, then I won't know where I begin and where I end. And I can be overly influenced by what's in the water, and also overly influenced by the little other frog spawns, people and other beings that are around me. So boundaries are very, very important. Okay, so boundary issues. So if our boundaries are damaged or impaired from things happening in this life, that's the first cause of pathologies within the subtle realms. Damage from things that occur in this life. And we'll go through some examples shortly. Okay, so it's all about dysfunctional boundaries, or perhaps stunted growth in the subtle body. So we should be developing, and we do not develop as we should do. And that could be caused by a dirty pool we're in, a dirty little frog pond that's been polluted. And therefore we have pollutants within us, and that stunts the growth of the tadpole. Or in our case, it stunts our growth of our emotional self or mental self. Okay, so the same principle applies. And perhaps we can say also, depending upon our point of view and our beliefs, our spiritual system, what we came with, how we were born. Okay, if you have a belief in serial reincarnation, you can say what you come from a previous life. Or if you don't believe in reincarnation, you can say what the Creator God, Goddess, however you see that, has chosen, beyond our choice, for us to work with in this life, for their purposes. So one person will have a different set of things to get over and exalt in, to another person will have some different set of things to get over and exalt in. Either way from this we say what we've come with, because we don't all arrive as a blank slate. If anyone's seen a newborn baby or had your own child, you know they are not a blank slate at all. Okay. So they're the broad causes, and as I say, we'll go through them one by one and look at the stuff. Okay. But when we say pathologies of the spirit, what exactly, well not exactly, roughly what are we talking about? Because these things are never exact. Okay, what are we talking about? Okay, we're talking about disturbances that may have no physical or psychological explanation. Okay, so hypothetically, drawing from examples that I've worked with, we could have someone who could have a fear, a disturbance, phobia, and there's no reason psychologically that they can find after 20 years of going to psychologists, and no lesions on the brains or any brain issues involved, but they have this intense fear of something. Okay. There's a wonderful line from the Indigo song. Called it. Do everyone know the Indigo song? Indigo Girls? Yeah, there's a line saying, I think about as my fears of my daily life explode, I try to trace them to my youth. And then you had to bring up reincarnation over a couple of beers the other night. And now I'm looking for results from a previous lifetime. So they're saying what happens in a previous lifetime can affect now. Okay. So that is a belief. Some people share it, some people don't, but other people explain it in different ways. But I don't think any system I know posits that we all come in completely influenced by the environment around us. There's always some form of what you come in with. Okay. So these can give physical and psychological. We look at this and there's something wrong here, but we can't find the causes, and therefore it could be a spiritual issue. And one of the things with this is that if you look at traditional systems such as the Indian or Vedic medical system, okay, they posit that 1 in 12 physical illnesses, 1 in 12 are caused by other beings or interactions on the spiritual realm. That's 1 in 12. So that's a field as large as gynecology and obstetrics. So if we were to accept this, we should be having big conferences on it. You know, there should be whole hospitals devoted to it. 1 in 12 physical illnesses caused by non-physical things. And that's about right for pretty much all indigenous understandings as well. It's like, it's not a small thing. Okay? And anyone who's been around the esoteric communities for a while will know it's not a small thing. Or if people have been in healing, in naturopathy or homeopathy, you will know that these things occur and it's not a small thing at all. There's a wonderful book by Phil Rickman called Midwinter of the Spirit, which so explains some of these issues. The title is brilliant. Midwinter of the Spirit is when the spirit is in complete darkness. Ourselves are in complete darkness. And it's not part of a spiritual process of unfoldment where we go into the dark night of the soul, as popularly called, tracing back to St. John. It isn't that. It's something is wrong. Okay, something is actually wrong. And in this case, in the novel, it's a connection with evil, which is often not a popular thing to talk about in today's spiritual climate, particularly in the New Age climate. Even in Christian churches, they're not talking about evil now, but evil is, and always has been, part of a traditional understanding of the spiritual realm. So that's the sort of stuff we're talking about, stuff that totally affects the person on all the realms, and it could be connected with evil. Now, this may or may not have a physical component. It may just be something that the person can't share very easily because they can't point to it. There's no physical component, but it's there and it's blighting their life. So that's the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say pathologies of the spirit. 1 in 12 physical illnesses, though, going back to the physical, traditionally around 1 in 12 caused by these problems. Okay. So back to the first cause, boundaries, which hopefully we don't have very, very big holes trying to patch up with chicken wire. Boundaries are so important. Okay. Causes of problems. Going back to the fact we operate on all levels all the time. I can't keep stressing that enough. And, you know, once you get under your belt that you are operating all the time on all levels, your life will change completely. I promise you that. Okay, causes of the problems with boundary issues, damage to boundaries. Unfortunately, abuse or trauma. Okay? So this includes unseen trauma, meaning it's not necessarily physical. So we're focusing here typically, but not totally exclusively, on intense physical or emotional abuse, often as a child. So during the process of abuse, the boundaries of victims are violated. So what occurs on the physical plane, through sexual abuse of a child, it also occurs on the other levels of the bodies. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above. So if someone is being violated by abuse on the outer levels, on the physical levels, the emotional levels, they are having their boundaries violated inwardly. Their subtle selves are also being violated, and this can cause a big problem, particularly if it's repeated. And there's many different esoteric theories in the West that says the person's full self, we talked about before, the physical self, the etheric self, the astral self, the mental self particularly, is not actually formed fully until we're around 21. So if there's repeated violations during the formation of our subtle selves, particularly the mental self, then we have a violation at the very roots of its formation. Okay, so if you imagine the violation of a boundary issue at the formation of the mental body, the mental self, it can cause all sorts of problems. Okay. So over the last number of years, decades, we've been blessed to work and help with people with a number of different problems. And the ones with boundary issues, vast majority have had some sort of abuse in their past. Okay, that's just been an anecdotal experience, and when I share with other people doing the same thing across the world, the same thing. Okay. Okay. Abuse is also two-way. this affects the abuser. Okay? So if someone is abusing someone, one of the understandings in the esoteric and most spiritual traditions is that you are opening yourself to that sort of abuse yourself. You are damaging your own self. You're damaging yourself if you abuse someone. And what can happen, not always, is that the abuser will become more closed off in themselves to stop the reality of what they've done, to stop them, that reality, in fact, they have just opened themselves to being abused, they close off and become cut off from the sources of life. Okay? And it becomes, psychologically, as we know, with abuse, it splits off almost. It almost splits off from part of themselves, and they don't want to face what they've done. They know it, but they don't want to face it. The same sort of things happens on the inner levels as well. So, abusers are damaged by the abuse as much as the victims are. Okay, now we're going into other ones, and I want to stress the next few I'm talking about is I am not presenting a moral point of view here. I'm not saying what is right or what is wrong. Okay, I'm presenting a functional point of view, the function. Okay, yeah. So the next one, unwise drug use. Okay, because some people, get all funny when I start. They think I'm telling them off taking drugs, which of course I'm not telling them off taking drugs, because what people do with their lives is what they do with their lives. It's not a moral issue. However, certain drugs affect certain subtle bodies. Okay? So, alcohol largely affects the physical body and the etheric body. Marijuana affects the etheric body and the astral body. Okay? Which is why alcohol, despite its, has far more public health issues than marijuana. It's why alcohol is fine to, perhaps people drink it after a lodge meeting or coven or going to church or whatever, where they don't generally pull out a joint. Okay. It's just because it affects different levels. Okay. It's not a moral thing saying when anything's bad or worse, because we all know from a public health issue, alcohol is the worst. Alcohol and tobacco. There's no doubt on that. Okay. So different drugs affect different levels. LSD, for example, and other so-called psychoactive or hallucinogens affect largely the mental level. No drug can affect the spiritual level. This is beyond, it was uncreated, and therefore any aspect in creation cannot affect the spiritual level. But it can affect, other drugs can affect the mental level. Okay? And what can happen with unwise drug use is that the boundaries on those levels can become diffuse. Okay? LSD is a classic example. People take LSD, and the LSD pioneers, such as Alpert and Leary, are really clear what they call about the set and the setting of how you take the drug. Your mental set, how you are yourself, and the setting where you're doing it makes the complete difference of taking hallucinogens or psychoactive drugs. So popping an LSD and going to a rave where you've got no control of who's going to be around you is totally against what they would say is a good way of using drugs. Okay? So these sort of things can then open your mental level to damage on the mental level, according to the esoteric theory. Okay. So it's just a question of what we call unwise drug use. The people will often encounter this with the mythic shamans use drugs, and yes, some, using that broad term, shamanic cultures use drugs. However, there's big differences. One is that the person was extremely well trained. The person leading it, you didn't just take it at Fremantle on a Saturday night. They were trained. It was part of a whole spiritual process. That actually, what they're ingesting are normally plants, and the shaman or the person working with it have worked with these plants. They know the spirit behind the plant. So that at the spiritual level downward, they know the plant. They perhaps nurtured the plant. They've gone out on their own vision quest and found the plant. They've done prayers with the plant. So so when you ingest that, you're getting all that alliance, that harmony with the plant for purpose. When you're buying methamphetamines on a street corner in Northbridge, you're not getting any of that, and you're also getting the energies on, because everything has a component. The methamphetamines has a physical component and an etheric component and an astral component. You're getting those components also ingested into you, okay, which is not very nice, shall we say. Okay. And we've treated people over the years, and sometimes from a single night of smoking marijuana, I've treated one person, a single night, where they've had ongoing spiritual issues, ended up in grey lands, and then ended up coming out and having to be treated for their spiritual issues as well as their psychiatric issues. And that's from one night of smoking marijuana. So it's not saying it's dangerous for everybody, but unwise use can cause problems of any drug. As I said, public health issue, where it's definitely alcohol and tobacco. So unwise drug use. Okay. Unwise spiritual practices. Okay. Again, not a moral issue at all. But I think one of the ways to look at spiritual practices is what they should be doing. And I put this in one of my lectures. And what it is basically, if you imagine ourselves we live in a box, okay? This box is defined by our culture and subculture and childhood upbringing. This box determines how we can think and what we can think, how we can experience the world. Now the idea of spiritual practice is to get us beyond the box, is to get us beyond. And it does this in certain ways. If you analyze all your spiritual practices from any tradition, effective ones, you'll find they do a number of things. Firstly, they do what's often called grounding. That is reaffirming the boundaries of the box. Reaffirming, making it solid. Then there's something that gets the consciousness out of the box into the other. The other. And whether you see that as communion with Christ, whether there's that communion with Goddess, some nature mystical experience, it's some other. Your consciousness goes out of the box to something other. And that changes you. Okay? It's a transition of consciousness. So then the consciousness has to come back into the box and then reaffirm the box, reaffirm the boundary with the changed consciousness. So the box slowly over years becomes more loose, more able to go out as you will, back and forth, as you will, okay, through practice. It doesn't diffuse the box, it doesn't punch holes in the box like some drugs will. Unwise spiritual practices missing these components somewhere along the line, if they don't do all of these ways of working safely, will produce a very faulty box. It will produce holes in the box. It will produce something that can cause pathology on the inner levels. Okay. But if you have a look at traditional practices, and from any esoteric tradition, any traditional spiritual tradition, traditional religion, you analyze them and you find they're all doing the same thing at root. Okay. So some examples are pretty obvious, and one is, for example, jumping on a Ouija board while under the influence of marijuana. That's an unwise spiritual practice and will no doubt cause some problem at some stage for some people. Okay, not for everybody, but at some point, some people will have a problem, with that. So there are unwise spiritual practices, and we don't need to go into what traditions are better than others and got the right things, but there are some unwise spiritual practices. Okay, and unfortunately, there are, some unwise spiritual teachers out there who encourage unwise spiritual practices. They often say the first lesson, the first aspect of the path, any spiritual involvement, is discernment, to work out what is actually going on, whether it's good, sensible, and safe. Okay. Moving on, and again, no moral view here at all, I promise you. Unwise sexual practices. Okay. So the sex in the Western esoteric tradition, it seemed to be that blessing gifted by the divine that connects the physical to the high spiritual. It can connect us through the entire realms, the sexual force, which is why it seemed to be divine, which is why in the old Book of Common Prayer we have the wonderful marriage service that has the line, "With my body I thee worship," seeing the other person as divine, their body. "With my body I thee worship." That's in the Book of Common Prayer. Okay. It's seen as a visible and outer representation of inward and spiritual grace, a sacrament, which is why traditionally in Christianity marriage is viewed as a sacrament. Okay, so sexuality is a sacrament, a great blessing, because it operates on all the levels. And because it operates on all the levels, it has great potential to change us in one way or another. Okay, so esoterically, and again the work of Wilhelm Reich in Germany in the 20s and 30s, who was the first person to study this, shows this. He talks about the ether, and his term for ether is organ. He talks about organ energy. Okay, and he was one of the first, he was a psychiatrist, he was a student of Freud, forgot the name for a moment. So really high, impeccable qualifications. He was one of the first person to actually film and view people having sex. Okay, so he did this in a dark room, and he saw what the esoteric traditions also postulated, that when you have sex, the bodies, the subtle selves, are expanded with the sexual force. Particularly the etheric body becomes affected. And this, as I've said before in other lectures, the etheric body is that body which connects with another person across the room at a party, and you just know you're going to end up smooching them at the end of the night. There's this magnetic connection. That is expanded as you make love, as you have sex. It gets expanded into the point of orgasm where it releases and down, and it becomes small, contracts to you at the points after orgasm, but very, very quickly rebuilds. Now it rebuilds the etheric body, it rebuilds from the light, the astral light in the astral body. It draws it down. So whatever emotions, thoughts, ideas, imageries, and beyond that in the mental body, concepts are there during sexual activity is drawing down into the etheric body, the equivalent of it. So if it's, which is why it's called making love, because it literally makes love in the etheric body. If what's there is based on negativity, anger, discord, power, domination, those things, then that will be reflected down. Okay? And esoterically, this is one of the reasons, esoterics will say, victims of domestic violence, one of the reasons they find it so hard to leave is not just because they've got the wrong attitude. Oh, you should just leave him. Normally it's a woman, not always. You should just leave him. You just need to change your attitude. It's because they've had sex, in some ways coerced, quite often, and what's happened is the dominating power has formed links on the etheric body between them and the abuser. And these are physical, almost physical links, quasi-physical links, really there at the etheric double and the etheric level. And you can have the right attitude, yes, I should leave him, or leave her, but you can't get beyond those etheric levels, because you have not been, like hopefully initiates or people who have spiritual practice are trained to be able to have their mind control their ether, control their etheric body. Okay? And often these things are mixed in with drugs, which forms these also links. It's mixed in with abuse, which forms these links. So what we're saying is that how you experience the sexual expression, what consciousness you have, does affect your subtle bodies. Okay? There are some forms of sexual practice, and again, no moral distinguishing here, but there are some forms that are designed to have an intense change of consciousness, such as BDSM. Okay? We know from our spiritual traditions, any change of consciousness, any getting us outside of our box of normal experience has to be done with care. Okay? And this is why, if you speak to some people from the BDSM community, they talk about the care that is required to do this correctly. And it is, you know, they talk about being masters, as in they know how to do this correctly without causing this damage to people. Some people don't understand this, and therefore these practices, unwisely taken, can cause these problems. Again, not with everybody, but it can happen. Anything that takes us outside of our box of ordinary self into a greater consciousness without care to make sure that we come back correctly, to make sure our box is correctly formed, can cause problems, and sex can do this. Okay. Other problems. Okay, this is just explaining. So, anyone involved with raising their own child or a teacher will know that at certain times there are what Maria Montessori calls teachable moments. There are times in the development of the child where it's good to introduce a new idea, a new concept, a new task, and that fosters their growth. They are looking for something new. The same with our subtle bodies. As we develop as children into adults, we are constantly looking for something new. We're constantly looking for something to sit on top of what we already have, to change ourselves. Okay, so if these things don't occur at the right time, it can cause a distortion in the subtle self. There's a esoteric understanding at the age of around 49, we've gone through 7 lots of 7 cycles. 7 is very important in the esoteric schema in the West. There's a line from one of our traditions, she has loved and blessed the number 7 above all things under her throne. 7 sacraments, 7 days of the week, 7 planets, there's 7s everywhere. So you've gone through 7 times 7, and around 49, a new phase of life has to occur in the East, in some Eastern traditions, particularly in the Hindu, Indian tradition. This is the age where your life as a householder stops and you start taking up your spiritual practice. You may enter into sannyasa, where you give up. This is the stage of spiritual practice, something new, something to sit on top. What do we do in the West? 50, we say, over 50s, retire, do nothing. And if you know some older people, they start their identity and their interests and their ideas start rigidifying from around 50 onwards. Okay? And they are unable to grow any more. And we can see that in some cases. I'm sure we all know some of our old elders who have done that. The role of spiritual practice is to ensure that at every stage of life that we are embracing the gifts of the divine and doing something new. But if you don't do it, it can cause problems in the spiritual body. Sorry, the spiritual pathologies. Okay, what we came in with. Okay, so we've done 45 minutes already. Okay, so what we came in with, this, again, depending on point of view, can be seen as past lives. Okay, I'm going to say be mindful of the K word, karma, and saying this is that person's karma. Okay, that can lead to a very uncompassionate view of the situation. Okay, yes, someone could be struggling with all sorts of things, from physical ailments to mental ailments to disturbances in any aspect of their being. And we have to be careful saying karma, because the sense of what's an individual person is only a construct anyway. Everything is connected with the culture, and how we react is much as important as what is going on for this person. In the Christian understanding, we can say where grace is, this is the grace of God, but we can't say where grace is not. So a profoundly autistic person, we can be moved to pity for them, but we don't know what's actually occurring with them. We don't know if this is the grace of God somehow. We can say where it is, but we can't say where it's not. So we've got to be careful with karma. Okay, I've heard so many people say, well, it's their karma. And some New Age healing traditions or practices, like rebirthing, have in the past been guilty, I say guilty, of saying you're not healing because you're choosing not to heal. Okay? That sometimes can be very, very distressing to have that message given to you. There could be all sorts of reasons why the healing isn't working. Yes, perhaps a choice of healing is useful, but you could have a contamination from a place where you lived when you were 14 years old for 2 years, and that heavy metal contamination could be affecting you. And it's got nothing to do with your choice. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay. We can come in with internal blockage or pathology. So a blockage, as in the flow of ether or the flow of energy, doesn't actually work. The flow of our astral life within us can be blocked or distorted. We'll talk more on this in a moment. The ghost of past incarnation, again, if you believe in past lives. This means that the past incarnation has not completely resolved itself, and it's resolved, so the life hasn't resolved, and is seeking to resolve it in this life. Okay, and that can go from a small thing to a sense of another being. That's full spectrum. There are other death pathologies, which again, if there's time at the end, I will talk about that in the question time. And then there are ancestral or other group concerns, okay? Because the ancestors is probably the most ignored area of esoteric healing in the West, okay? In other traditions, it's integral to understanding. If you've got a physical illness, they look for any ancestral problems. Are the ancestors being respected? Do the ancestors need work given to them, sacrifices, offerings? Do they need to be acknowledged? So ancestors can play a part. And as I say, other group concerns. So if we are born into a culture, if you were born, even this culture, if you're born white, Caucasian, into this culture, we are partaking of the mind of colonization. So we have that within us, okay? So we are connected with colonization by exactly what we're born into. And sometimes that can be a problem. Okay, what problems do we have with ourselves? As we said, one of these I've talked about before, the rigid boundaries for whatever reason, not just because we've abused someone, but for whatever reason. We could be afraid, we could make the wrong decision, we could be taught wrong. We develop rigid boundaries and we close off ourselves to the ether around us, the life force around us. We close off ourselves to the astral light, to sexual expression, and we become rigid in ourselves. That's too much rigid boundaries. Allied to that, as you said before, the blockages. We can form these, we don't come in with them, but our experiences in our life, through these things we talked about before, unwise spiritual practice, unwise drug use, and other things can help us form blockages, breaks, and dysfunctional channels within ourselves. So where the light, or the ether, or the mental consciousness isn't focused correctly. What are you doing? Thought forms, okay.
It's okay, it's gone.
It's gone. Okay, so thought forms is a postulation, and it is within some Eastern traditions too, but it largely comes in the Western tradition that I know it of, is that where we have part of ourselves that in some way is split off from ourselves. So we have perhaps a desire, and it may be a desire to express ourselves sexually, to express ourselves artistically, to express who we really are, and we can't do it. So that splits off from ourselves. Or we don't want to face the fact that sometimes we actually feel like throwing our child out the window, which every parent does. But people may not want to face that. So that splits off and creates what's called a thought form. And these thought forms can exist in all the different levels of the body. And you can have an astral component, an etheric component, and a mental component of these thought forms. Carl Jung talks about these as autonomous partial complexes. That's the term he uses for the psychological, autonomous partial complexes. And he says, because they're formed from the persona, they necessarily therefore sometimes take the constituents, they come as a person. So it's like a little different person within our various spheres. And thought forms within us can cause a dysfunction of energy, and lots of energy is taken into maintaining them down there, and lots of energy, lots of astral light is taken to forgetting that they're there. So they can be quite a problem. Okay. Subtle body dissociation. So what I mean by that is, we've all probably experienced this a little bit, where you've been doing something really intense and you get back home and part of you is still there. Okay, part of you is still there, still going around in your mind. Okay, this means part of your astral self is still there. Okay, for some people, if their boundary of self, back to the frog spawn, if they don't have a correct form of osmosis of the water and the other outside, if they're too diffuse, they are there a lot and they get obsessional thoughts occurring. Okay? So subtle body dissociation is another problem we have. And yeah, like I said, most of us experience this to some degree. Then there's breaks in connection, and again we may want to look at this in terms of our beliefs in past life or not. This isn't just Eastern, Western esoteric, it's also part of some Jewish traditions. Zev Ben Alevi, a modern writer, talks about this from the Lurianic tradition, where the soul, if it doesn't complete its task, using modern terms, can separate into two, and those two in the next incarnation are constantly seeking each other. Google him, that's the term for incarnation there. So this comes to the concept perhaps of the very bad, awful term soulmates, but it's where some other person you form a connection with, and it's an intense connection, okay? So you have this intense connection with them, and then if that gets broken, the effects of that can damage your subtle bodies. On a more less Dion Fortune's occult novelty point of view, I just think of my parents here, and I've talked to them about this before. They've been married 50 years, and they've lived together virtually much all the time in the last 40 of those years. Now when my mother goes away, my father feels it intensely. They've been living in the same place, sleeping together. So their etheric bodies are joined. So when one etheric body goes away, there's a lack. Okay? Their astral bodies are joined. So there's a lack on the astral level, perhaps even on the mental level. So you often see this the case with people who've been partners for many, many decades. When one dies, there's a tremendously bad result in the other, and often they'll be dead in less than a year. Okay? So this, esoterically, is explained by the fact that suddenly half of them is missing. They're leaking out, they're looking for it, and their subtle bodies aren't operating as well as they could be. Breaks in connection. Outside of us. So, as I said, we are in a pond, so we can absorb negative, using that term broadly, or not helpful substance. That's our ether. We can absorb negative ether. If you are if you move to a town to go and study and there's no places to live while you're a student except a crack house, you're going to be absorbing these negative things on all these levels. You're going to be absorbing negative etheric energy. In the house, you're going to be absorbing negative astral light and consciousness. Okay? So what environment we're in, we absorb. Okay? Unless we have spiritual practice, I always come back to spiritual practice where we can put up safe boundaries and clear out the negativities. Okay, outside of us, something again not talked about too much in the Western tradition is the land beings. Okay, land beings are there. There's not much you can do about it. They're there. You have to work with them, respect them. R.J. Stewart, who's a writer in the esoteric traditions in the West, talks about living, which he didn't know at the time, on a ley line, on a sacred site, and the damage that produced to him. And you try clearing, doing all sorts of things. Nothing makes a difference because it's from the land. Okay? You can't clear away. If there's a land issue, you have to go with what they want. You have to work with them. And as I said, all the traditions older traditions I know of traditionally recognize the land. Okay, they recognize the land. And sometimes we just have to be careful and mindful of the land we live with. And then there's entities and other critters. We've got a nice little gnome there. Wants to let us know that they're not all bad. There are entities, beings, angels, land spirits, fairies, guardians, Geno Loci. There's a whole, the whole plethora of this. This is a whole other lecture. There are other beings out there in the universe. And there's different ways of viewing these. These are the problems. We'll come back to this. Okay, different ways of viewing this. Modern secular view, go to a psychologist, this is in my book by the way, if you recognise it, go to a psychologist, they say the beings, the gnomes and stuff, are all inside our brain. There they are, they're inside us. Okay. And any similarity we have, I experience a gnome, and then Sean experiences a gnome and say, hey, I saw this gnome, and I said, that's exactly the same as the gnome I saw. The psychologist will say, oh, it's because we're both human. That's what I'm saying. That's the modern secular point of view. It's totally the opposite to the traditional point of view, and in every indigenous and traditional culture, before the Renaissance, even in our Western culture, which are the beings and spiritual powers are outside us. We live in this world where there are demons, angels, gnomes, fairies, all the rest around us. That's the traditional pre-modern view. The Hermetic, esoteric point of view is that the beings are inside are a reflection of the beings outside. There is the understanding that humanity is made in the image of the one being. We are microcosms, small universes of the larger universe. And we have potentially within us an interior gnome, an interior devil, an interior angel. And it's our boundary there, seeing how permeable they are, that makes the difference. So we have an interior representation, interior sense of the angel Raphael. Okay? Otherwise we wouldn't even know Raphael when we came across Raphael. And it's our boundary how well we are able to open ourselves to the great Raphael, to empower our linkage with Raphael, and that's the key of spiritual practice. Okay. So that's the view we're coming from in esoteric healing. The outside is a reflection of the inside and vice versa, and it's the boundaries that are the most important. So looking at the healing. So there's three broad types of healing. There's the physical, this is healing on the subtle levels, esoteric healing. There's physical healing, which can lead to change in the esoteric level, the hidden levels. So we have a problem physically, and it can lead to a problem, a change in a problem on the inner levels. And I'm thinking of a situation which I was thinking when I was driving over here, because later one of the things, which I will stress again then, is to always look for physical causes first. Always. And it was many years ago, in my first, when I was involved in Wicca, many years ago, and I remember this wonderful thing, it was something like a second meeting or something, and it was on healing. And we had a healer there called Barney, and working with one of the priestesses of Perth at the time, Lady Tanith. And after the lecture, she said, look, I've been having this problem with my stomach. I've been going up in doctors for a long time, can't do anything with it. He looked at her and said, well, your back's out. And his ovary just snapped into her back and it went away. Now that was causing her problems not only with her stomach, it was causing her problems with her energy, what she would call a spiritual energy. It was having problems all the way up. And a simple adjustment of the spine made all the difference. Okay? So changes in the physical can lead to changes in the subtle. So that's physical healing. It doesn't really concern us here. There's spiritual healing, which is often a good example of this is Reiki. So it introduces causes of harmony. And it's the classic, let's bathe everyone in white light, let's bathe everyone in the divine energy. It's the idea is to increase health. Okay? Just increase the causes of health. And then there's the esoteric healing, which incorporates the other two, and it also focuses on the removal of disease. And that's the big difference. So it's not just looking at causing health, it's looking at what's causing the physical, the esoteric, the disease on the other levels, and let's remove that as well as promote health. That's esoteric healing. And some forms of non-like esoteric traditional healing do that. I'm thinking, of course, looking at Michael here, homeopathy is a perfect example of how this works. Homeopathy is a wonderful example. Okay, so they're the broad types. We're focusing on the latter, the esoteric healing, where we remove the causes of ill health as well as promote health on the inner levels. Principles. Again, We're operating on all levels all the time. Right now, I'm operating on the mental level to some degree, and you're receiving and coming back to me on the mental level to some degree. All the time. I have to stress this is a esoteric point of view, okay, where we have different levels. It's not a faith-based healing, so it's completely different. It's not saying that one's wrong and this one's right. It's just a different approach, where like traditional faith-based healing is placing the healing in the power of the deity. So traditional sacramental healing in Christian churches, for example, will place the healing in the arms, so to say, of Christ. And that's because deities exist from the spiritual realm down to the physical. Christ became incarnated. He was physical. So there's a linkage there all the way down. Therefore, faith-based healing, putting the faith, asking for the intervention of the deity, can be extraordinarily effective. It's just a different approach. Okay? Because the deities exist all the way down, like in ancient Egypt. Isis was the Nile, not the Nile represented Isis. Isis was, the physical Nile was Isis. Physical. So therefore, physical healing can come from faith-based healing. But this is esoteric. It's a different way. Again, remember, each and every person is whole, complete, and divine within themselves, no matter what is going on. And recently, if anyone's been on Facebook, you may have seen rituals once a month, actually. I think they're now done to curse Donald Trump, binding and cursing. A traditional esoteric approach would say, no, actually Donald Trump is divine, whole, and complete in himself. As much as we may not face that, he is a divine, whole, complete person. And we can't bind him, we can't curse him because of that. Okay. This is a principle of esoteric healing. Okay, very big one here. Healing on one plane requires the intervention on the plane above. Okay? So to move our hand, we use our energy. So that's the ether, that's our energy moving my hand. Beyond the energy, I've got my will in my astral body. Oh yeah, I'm going to move my hand, and it moves. I may have a block in my mental body that says, no way, I'm going to move my hand, and it doesn't move. Okay? And that's why the hypnotism was called mentalism. It's working on the mental level. You can put those blocks there, or open there. But every plane you want to heal on requires intervention, requires the energy of our consciousness, that participation of the plane above it. Okay. And that means, of course, the linkage between the planes are crucial. And this is why I gave the example of the etheric double. If we wanted to do physical healing, if you want a physical result, we have to make sure there's nothing impeding what we do on the higher levels within the etheric double. Otherwise, it just all gets blocked there. Okay. The etheric double becomes very important. And then, again, I would definitely recommend homeopathy for working on the etheric double. Definitely. Brilliant. Okay. Corollary, of course. A healer, esoteric healer, can only heal to the plane below the plane they can operate on. So if I can operate on the astral plane only, I can only heal to the etheric level. Okay? Just that simple. Okay? Because it requires an intervention of the astral. To heal the astral requires an intervention of the mental. If I'm not functioning on the mental level, it doesn't matter what I do, it isn't going to heal that level. This is why esoteric healers often do their work with the help of inner plane beings. Because as humans, we can, if we're lucky, function on the high mental level. But say we need to heal on the mental level. Okay? Operating on the spiritual level may be beyond us while we're in someone's come to us for healing. We normally operate on the spiritual level when we're having a mystical experience. We can't call up mystical experiences to help people at the top of a hat. So we work with inner plane beings, angels, guides, inner plane contacts that can help do that and channel it down. That's why esoteric healing often works with inner plane people. The first thing that's done, first off, is boundaries. If someone comes to an esoteric healer, they will see whether the boundaries are functional, and if they're not functional, they will restore them, first off. Otherwise, what you do is just pause out. It's like you're pouring water, holding my bucket of eyes up. Constantly out. Okay. More principles. Okay, again, corollary. Any healing will fail if their cause is a cause for ill health equal to or higher than the plane of being. So if I'm trying to heal on the astral level, okay, and there's a cause for ill health on the mental level, I'm stuffed unless I can work with an inner plane being on the spiritual. Because the cause for ill health in the mental level will come down to the astral at some point. Okay, I'm blessed to do work with a couple of people, 3 or 4 over the years actually, working with asthma. And asthma is a very good example of this, where asthma sometimes can easily be resolved by simple etheric work. So Reiki often works beautifully with asthma. And generally, it doesn't matter who the Reiki person is, we all operate on the astral level. All of us operate in the astral level hypo now. So we can all heal on the etheric level by just simply putting our hands on someone, focusing on love and light. The etheric level can get healed very easily. But if there's an emotional cause behind the asthma, which often there is for some people, then you have to work on the mental level. And if there's a mental belief in the person, and a couple of people I'm thinking of, that they shouldn't be alive, if you mental belief that you shouldn't be alive for whatever reason, and it turns out one of these people had, unknown to them, their mother tried a backyard abortion, didn't work, but they had picked that up, that they shouldn't be alive. That was a mental level belief they had all their life, that they shouldn't be alive. So they had been to a number of healers, and they'd healed the emotional, and then issue, and then after 12 months or so, it would come back. Then we'd sit back down, and the asthma would return. So we had to work on the mental level, that belief, that deep, deep belief that they shouldn't be alive, and connect them to the source of their own divinity, that yes, they should be alive. So essentially, the only thing that healed them was spirituality. You know, so, yeah, the levels are really clear. If there's a cause for ill health at a level, you have to go to the level above. Okay, so differential diagnosis, because some of this could be just plain physical. Okay, differential diagnosis is essential. It can only be conducted up to the subtle plane the healer can access, which is again why subtle esoteric healers often work with inner plane beings who can access it, where they can't access it. Always look for physical causes first, second and last. Always. Always, 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 always. Don't think you've got it down pat. It could have something physical. It could be psychiatric. You always have to look for physical. Not just at the beginning, but before you're ready to apply any healing. Okay, as I said, Barney just went, yes, your back. He looked and saw it was the back. And that was it. He looked on the physical level first. And it solved Tanef's problem. Physical levels. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can't stress that enough. Never leave a vacuum. So, cause of ill health. Yeah? So you've got a cause of ill health. In this, let's go back to the asthma example. That I shouldn't be alive. You can, that can be a thought form. That can be a high level, mental level thought form. And you can remove it. But there's a vacuum there. Okay? And there's a passage in the Bible somewhere about that. From where it is. You never leave a vacuum. You have to fill that. So in this case, we have to replace that with the divine understanding, yes, they should be alive. Okay, you have to replace. Whatever you remove in terms of ill health, you have to replace with light in the broader sense. Something positive in the broader sense. Something opposite to the mental pattern they had. Always replace. We can be healed and still die. Okay? Death isn't a failure at all. And if you haven't seen the lecture, Emily and Simon videoed it on the esoteric dimensions of death. Please do. I don't know whether I mentioned that. There's a wonderful story. It's on my blog. I got from a book called Trickster, Magician and Grieving Man. And it's so in the Western traditions. In the Western traditions, we have the light starting in the east, and then it sinks in the west. That's half the circle. There's another half of the circle concerned with death. Okay? Death is never seen as the enemy in the esoteric traditions at all. But there's a wonderful story. Someone in The Trickster, Magician and Beaver Man, a Cree Indian, is talking about his grandmother who was sick and took her to the medicine man, and he prayed over her and with the rattle and the various things. And he saw his grandmother after that young and free, like he'd never seen her before, so happy, and she was enjoying life. And then she died, of course. She had TB or cancer, and people die. Healing is not about keeping life, it's about being connected with the sources of life, whether we die physically or not. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay? We can be healed and we can still die. Or we can not be healed and be alive for 5 more years of not being in connection with life. So esoteric healing is essentially the application of magic, ceremonial magic and other techniques to the subtle bodies. Okay. So, chugging along, too bad. What we can do is use magical and esoteric techniques to remove blocks in the subtle bodies. The subtle bodies are formed from our consciousness. Okay, this is a very important point. It's connected to the consciousness, and if the person is open to it, we can use magical techniques and change the subtle bodies, and that will change their health and the whole being. It's sort of similar to a bicycle, okay, sort of. Whereas if you move the back wheel, the pedals will move. Okay, so it's the same with us. We're tense, and our breathing is ragged. We calm our breathing consciously, and our tension goes away. One affects the other. So we can use magic or esoteric healing to remove problems in the subtle bodies. And if the person's open to that change, it can affect the whole being. So opening and connecting subtle bodies to positive and appropriate forces. So in fact, that's like a mini initiation. That's similar to the asthma person I was working with, where we got her connected to the sense of her own divinity. And that's what made the difference. So we worked, and then we connected her, and then she continued to work with that. And you have to continue to work with that. Okay? So sometimes people come to you and they are all over the place. They're frog spawns all over, and you have to just close them up. And normally that's an amulet or a talisman, something you give them, and it just closes them. Allied to that is more of like an esoteric bandage. So say they've got a leakage. These are metaphorical things. I do want to stress these are metaphorical. Say they have a leakage on the ether level, so they're constantly pouring out. They were connected to someone very intensely, a lover, and the lover was killed. And they were constantly leaking out to a person who's not there anymore. You can form a structure in the etheric body, like a bandage, again metaphorical, that stops that leaking while they learn to form their own boundaries. But without that aid, they can't learn to form their own boundaries because they're constantly in trauma, constantly giving out. Okay. So esoteric healing can do all that. If we've been in a dirty pond, fortunately we moved to a town and we've only could find a crack house, a place to live in, esoteric healing can help us remove that negative energy and help us protect ourselves from it later as well. And that's on the etheric, astral and mental level. If we have connections which are negative between one person and another, and we get here the concept of what people call energy vampires. It's an awful term, but what it means is some people, through their own damage, remember they are whole, divine, and complete in themselves, but through their own damage need to absorb energy, ether, or light, emotions from other people to keep themselves going. And that can form a connection if you can engage with these people a lot. Okay, and there could be other forms of connection in a group, even a negative group you want to get out of. It could even be at a subtle level when you when you are divorcing someone. Say you've been with someone for 20 years and you're divorcing. Your etheric body Unless the two people are in control of their etheric bodies, the etheric bodies are still going to be joined. So we can do processes to gently remove that connection in the etheric body. We've talked about thought forms before. So you've got these energies, the autonomous partial complexes. With care, depending on the level, these things can be moved into integration by esoteric healing techniques. Okay, so we talked about when you go Christmas shopping or when you've done something really intense, part of you is still there. Some people are very scattered, okay, and you can draw back parts of them. And they may be scattered through trauma from previous past negative events. In popular New Age parlance, drawing from some Native American traditions, North American traditions, they call it soul retrieval, where the soul is stuck somewhere in some memory, some trauma, or in some other realm, and we call it back. There's a process in the Western traditions called the Emmanuel formula, which does the same. And it does the same on a simple level to a full soul retrieval. There's various different levels. Emmanuel, of course, the name that means the presence of God is with us. It's about that centralizing sphere. And we draw back from the four directions and the four elements, the person back to themselves. And now we're getting to the more rare but not unknown situation, where these entities, unlike the good gnome, may not be good for us. And they can get linked to our subtle body. So that's entities, curses, exorcisms, those sort of things. It does happen. It's reasonably rare, but it does happen. And esoteric healing is perfect method for working these things through. And we talked about this ghost. So if you believe in past life, you have a life that has not fully integrated in its death process. And part of it is still there when the soul reincarnates, and it attaches naturally to the new life. And you have this sense, some people, of this other persona seeking to do things and drawing off energy, and it can cause all sorts of problems. Okay, Dion Fortune used the term ghost for that. And this ghost, for want of a better term, this thing exists in the realm of ceremonial magic. It exists in the realm of the astral and of the mental, and therefore it is able to be affected by ceremonial magic. Okay? And again, it's not something you just rip off. You've got to do it carefully and replace with light. Okay, and I think that's it. Yes, that's it. Apart from questions, if people got questions. MJ.
You have spoken about humans.
About, sorry?
Humans.
Humans, yes.
Yes, people. What about animals?
I have very little experience with animals. So I can only guess answers. I really couldn't give you, I'd be guessing and there's no point. You would know more than me. So, all my animal friends have all had happy, healthy lives, luckily. So, yeah, I can't answer, I'm sorry. But good to chat about that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have seen experiences. I've literally seen experiences with animals that have been just mind-blowing, mind-blowing. I remember the death of my parents' goat, Hexa. And she had pregnancy toxemia, unfortunately. And I was up at my parents' place, and I suddenly felt, you suddenly move. You don't know why you moved. I was in the lounge room, and I moved, and I went out. And as I was going out, my mum said, "Hexa's collapsed." And I went out there, and there was Hexa, and this is my subjective expression with Hexa. I'm sitting there, and she's dying, and her being, her soul, literally comes out of the body, turns to face my parents. They're in grief; they can't see it. Turns to face my parents, says goodbye, and then just disappears. Mind-blowing, just like really, really. And I've seen those things. I would suggest that my experience is like that. And I have another experience with a magpie. I think I've said before, my parents, my mum particularly, used to look after injured birds. And again, we got this magpie that was hit by a car, and it was in the box, and I was looking after it when I was 14. And again, I suddenly found myself moving away from the TV. I came out, the magpie had only just lying there, and it stood up. It never stood up before. It made that beautiful magpie sound and died as I was looking at it. So I would, from these sort of experiences, I would suggest that animals are extremely connected to what's actually happening. I've not seen any pathologies, but I haven't, like I said, all my animal friends, really, we've been very lucky. Yeah.
I just try to think, with my alpacas,
Oh, yeah.
when a female is about to give birth, she actually separates from the herd, which is most unusual because they're all joined at the shoulders.
Yes.
And she, she's in labor because she's separated and she's humming. And as the cria is about to be born, and as soon as the nose comes out of the back end of the mum, the cria starts humming to the mum. And then
Wow.
all the other females gather around in a semicircle at the back end, and they start humming. And the baby is hummed into the world.
How amazing.
And very much me, their owner, who's been present at many births, but I'm an outsider to the group. The group is working, they're doing,
How interesting.
they're doing work, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you for that.
What animal was that?
Alpaca.
Alpaca.
Alpacas.
But with kangaroos, I've had adult male black glove wallaby who they just have heart attacks when they come in contact with humans. First off, they're not a cuddly little kangaroo Joey. And this one was hit by a car, and he was obviously stunned, and he was obviously in a great deal of pain. And a lady by the name of Kadumbi heard about it the next day, and she did Australian bush floral essences.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no way of saying to the animal,
Yes.
yeah, this is a placebo effect, you're going to feel better. She sent somebody over with all sorts of things. And the moment one of these homeopathic drops hit his skin, and I was holding him, he just went, ah.
Yeah.
And he relaxed in my arms for the first time. And I thought, okay, so you aren't going to have a heart attack and die on me.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I think
There's a
I've,
smoke bush from Geraldton.
Yeah. I think I've put on my blog when my child was young, thanks to Michael here, who I will forever be grateful for he was teething very badly,
Yeah.
and we got a remedy. And literally, I would wake up screaming, 2 or 3 years old, before it could be any placebo. Drop in the mouth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, asleep. That instant.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, just stunning, brilliant.
Yeah.
And you could possibly postulate somehow psychic placebo, but that's a whole wonderful thing in itself.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that if it works. But one day I picked up the wrong remedy, accidentally in my sleep, put it in, didn't work, and I was getting freaky. I was like, oh my God, it's not working. So I looked, and that wasn't the right remedy. But then they were distressed. It took them 30 seconds. And then before they were asleep. So yes, no placebo involved there at all. And there's no way. Yeah. So and yes, homeopathy is what I would call an esoteric healing. It's hidden. There's nothing you can point to. You separate the homeopathic remedy and find no drops. So it's hidden, esoteric. And it works pretty beautifully.
You talked about Reiki,
Yes.
affecting the etheric.
Easy. It can affect more, but anyone can do Reiki on the etheric.
Right. Are there other modalities you could recommend to help other bodies, the other?
Well, I only practice esoteric healing, so I can't really recommend anything else apart from what I've been taught in my Rosicrucian allied traditions. So yeah, there's heaps of modalities out there that work higher, but I don't know them. I don't practice them. Yeah.
But you can use Reiki then on all the bodies?
If the Reiki practitioner have that connection, they can utilize the Reiki process for all those bodies.
It's just the visualization.
Well, yes, but the visualization works at the astral level. As soon as you go beyond the astral level, there's no vision. Okay, mental body is pure consciousness to consciousness. Okay, so if you're visualizing, you're on the astral level.
Then it's your intent.
It's will and intent and and you have formed your mental consciousness to some degree. I guess through practice and meditation and spiritual work, is how I would say it, yeah. But yes, some Reiki people work very, very deep levels. I was just saying that anyone can do Reiki, and people get results, and they go, oh my God, you know, and they're not realizing it was actually a very spiritual tradition originally that worked on all the levels, but because people get results very quickly, sometimes those traditions like Reiki, people think it's at that level, and it's actually way beyond potential.
They could, while they're doing Reiki, invoke other entities as well.
They could do, yes, and certainly some of them do, yeah. Yeah. Yes.
It doesn't need to be obvious.
No. Not at all. Yeah. Any other questions, concerns?
So if somebody is practicing healing for somebody,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of preparation should they do, and what
Mm.
kind of aftercare for themselves and the other person?
Sure. Well, the preparation, again, is about connecting to the highest level of divinity you can conceive of, firstly, always. Secondly, connecting to any inner plane beings, currents, helpers, on a better term, that you're working with. Then grounding, then the healing, then sealing, thanking, grounding. That's how I would do it. Yeah, so it's again, it's starting right and finishing right in the highest level. Yeah. And of course, if you get any sort of sense in between that you have released and perhaps picked up, or the room has picked up any negative ether, when I say negative, it's just disturbed ether or disturbed astral light, you would do a cleansing of the room and a cleansing of yourself as well. Okay. I mean, that does happen sometimes, no matter how much preparation you've done. If someone hits a disturbed trauma situation, for example, it comes out, and that's fine. You just need to do some cleansing of yourself and cleansing of the room afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.